So I wanted to show you today where you can get inspiration, such as the Popeyes that I've been drawing. And Popeye, like I told you, was an old comic strip 100 years ago called Thimble Theater, and where I saw some of the first episodes of that strip was in old books like this one, the Smithsonian collection of newspaper comics, which has tons of examples of old comic strips from way, way back. You see some of the very first comics that were done back in the old days. And what you can do is use this as inspiration for your drawings and designs of characters. There's the Yellow Kid, who was one of the first comic strips in American newspapers 100 and some years ago. And his shirt would have his dialogue on it. And it was about living in this tenement neighborhood. And I think they changed the name at some point to Hogan's Alley. So you can find books about comic strips in the library. There's one of the Hogan's Alley Athletic Club. This is one of the old Yellow Kid strips from back then. Timothy Aloysius Tad Dorgan, 1902. Johnny Wise. Johnny Wise gets a double cross. So they put the guy's picture here. Then here's his adventures all around the picture. Very simplistically drawn. Buster Brown was an extremely popular comic strip back in those days. Jimmy Swinnerton did this comic strip about this little boy called Jimmy. And here's Winsor McCay and Little Nemo in Slumberland. Fantastically drawn comic strip. No one was drawing comic strips like this back in those days except Winsor McCay. He was acknowledged as the top comic strip guy back then. Fantastic use of perspective. You see these people walking across this, I guess it's a background that's turned on its side. Let's keep going through here. Let's skip ahead. See if we can find, here's Mutt and Jeff, another early comic strip. People love this comic strip. That became one of the early animated cartoons from its time. Polly and Her Pals was really another one that was quite beloved back then. There's another Mutt and Jeff in color. People love Moon Mullins. Here's Winsor McCay came back with Little Nemo. And you can see these characters are big, walking through the cityscape, which is perfectly drawn. No one had ever done comics like that. It was Bringing Up Father, another really great old comic strip by George McManus. Barney Google was very popular also back then. Gasoline Alley, another great old strip. Here you can see the weirdness of this blanket turning into a tiger, his bed turning into a boat, and now he's in a cloud. The tiger becomes this guy, and then suddenly it turns into an elephant that turns into a balloon, and the bottom of the balloon turns into a bathtub, which bends around and spills the water out and the kids out. And now they're back in bed, and there's Uncle Walt. Looks like Corky's in the bed also. So, like I said, you use these as inspiration for what you want to do. Here's an early Popeye strip, 1933. Popeye's in a fight with this guy. And as you see, it looks like the Max Fleischer cartoons, but it doesn't. So it is, but it isn't, because when you do animation, you make changes in character design. But as you see, it's a really great strip, and you sit down and actually read it for its time and understand the humor that's going on here. As Seeger makes fun of things that are going on in the real world. Here he's fighting the sea hag for some reason or other. There's Wimpy. There's the cook giving Wimpy burgers. He ran another strip on top of it, it looks like, called Sappo. And here he does funny films where you would cut this out of your newspaper and then put Olive's legs through these dotted lines. You make slits. And you slide the legs up and down, and it looks like she's dancing. This kept people entertained for hours back in those days. So it's quite a big thing of Popeye strips going on here. Thimble Theater, I should say. I guess they went to the island of the Goons and found Alice the Goon. Like I said, there's a lot of pages because this was a great strip. So you can find collections of these strips at your library or on Amazon. But this is a fantastic book that I've had for a long time, and it goes through the history of comic strips, basically. And like I said, you can use comic strips as a jumping off point for your character designs and your storylines even. So that's one book of strips. Then I got this book, which is all about the great comic strip artists. And when I saw Seeger's name here, plus Harriman and McKay and Roy Crane, I just had to get this book. So let's open it up and see what we got. And we have a chapter that's all about Popeye. Starting here. There's a drawing of Popeye hitting something that looks like a ghost. And there's a caricature of Seeger sitting at his desk. He did not live that long, 1894 to 1938. So it goes through his history. At one time he did a Charlie Chaplin comic strip and some other comic strips. And then he hit on Thimble Theater and put Popeye in there at some point. And we see these old strips with Popeye. Here's one with Popeye and Wimpy. Wimpy was the chiseler, always begging for money so he could get another burger or two. Here we see him gaining weight eating all these burgers. So this is another great book to get. I guess I could show you some other strips in here. Let's go back here and see. Here we go. Crazy Cat by George Harriman. Started with some other strips first, and then he landed on Crazy Cat, which is a really crazy strip. Very simplistically drawn, and yet the dialogue and the drawings really come together and make something that's totally unique. This is out in the Arizona desert, Coconino County is where this takes place. The strip is based on Crazy Cat and Officer Pup, the cop, and the mouse, Ignatz, who is always hitting Crazy Cat with a brick. There's Ignatz picking up a brick. There's Crazy singing. And then I went to Seeger. Another Polly and her pals. This strip, Little Orphan Annie, was just the most popular strip at one time back in the 30s. About this girl, little girl who was an orphan. She somehow hooks up with this rich guy, and they have adventures around the world. I guess she's teaching him something, teaching him lessons about something. So Tarzan had his own strip drawn by Hal Foster, who was one of the three great adventure strip artists, along with Alex Raymond and Milton Caniff. So here's a great page of Prince Valiant talking to this giant. The giant's telling him about his life and being ostracized. Here you can see some great art by Foster on Prince Valiant. Just extraordinary art that no one has come close to. You see these drawings, you're just going, whoa. And people got this in the newspaper every Sunday. It's another great page. Back in those days, the Sunday page was probably twice as big width-wise and had this entire strip on that page. If you can imagine something like this, about 22, 24 inches wide and 30 or 40 inches tall. That's how big the strip was. It was enormous. Foster's big competitor was Alex Raymond, who did Secret Agent X9 and then the great strip Flash Gordon. Started in the newspapers back in the 30s. Flash Gordon was made because somebody had done a Buck Rogers strip, and these guys came to Alex Raymond and said, "Can you do us a science fiction thing?" So he created Flash Gordon. You look at the drawing there, it's just extraordinary. Just nobody was doing drawings like this on the funny pages until Alex Raymond and Hal Foster came along. And then the third guy, Milton Caniff, came along and did Terry and the Pirates, about a young boy traveling around the world with this older guy having adventures. So there was Terry and Pat Ryan and the cook Connie. And his way of doing the comic was he drew in the shadows. He drew a lot of shadow stuff as he got more comfortable doing the strip. So you had a lot of darkness here. And when you saw the strip in black and white, it was really striking to see this work. To see a panel that was nothing but darkness, and then the whites of the sails of these boats on the seas. So he worked from the dark into the light, it seemed. This is a page where Terry, as an air corpsman, is getting a lecture from an older officer about make sure you behave in the service, make sure that you always appreciate everything that was behind you that made for our being in World War II, for making all this equipment and all the support staff that goes into it. And never forget that. And it's one of the most popular strips of Terry and the Pirates. He eventually left that syndicate because he couldn't own Terry and made up another strip called Steve Canyon, which was about a guy that was out of the service and making his own company as air transport and his adventures around the world. And there's Chester Gould, who made Dick Tracy, which was a comic strip back in the 30s. He had been submitting strips to the syndicates and they were turning them down, and finally he submitted Tracy and it got accepted. And it has its own unique style. So you look at old comic strips, you get inspired. You see a lot of things that you never saw before because they came so far ahead of you. Al Capp created this one, Lil Abner, about these country bumpkins. And you see the strip looks one way here in 1934. And as time goes on and he gets better as an artist and his assistants get better, it takes on a whole new look. And it's all a satire on American life. from the southern hillbillies' point of view, and you see him making a lot of fun of America through the strip. Walt Kelly made fun of everybody through his strip, a bunch of animals living in the swamps, the Okefenokee swamps. His strip was called Pogo. A really great strip that started out in a comic book, I think, and since he owned it, he took it to the syndicate, and it became a comic strip. These wonderful drawings of these little funny animal characters. Kelly used to work at Disney Features back in the 30s, so he knew all about how to make characters look really great. You see some really wonderful drawings here. So animatable. And in fact, there were 2 animated Pogo specials. One was hand-drawn and the other was stop motion. And the last one in the book is Charles Schulz, who created Peanuts, the really great comic strip that ran for 50 years. They did some wonderful things in Peanuts. Schulz was a genius. This deceptively simplistic style, and the compositions with the word balloons works every time. And you'd be hard pressed to find someone that could do work like that these days, I think. So that's 2 books. Then I got this Popeye collection, a bunch of dailies from 1932 to 1934, and you get to see continuity of these strips. And you get to see and read what's going on and his take on what government is all about. He's always having little things with this king of this fictional country. And you can learn a lot about drawing, composition, and writing by studying Popeye strips. Will Eisner said this was one of his big influences when he was growing up, was the Popeye comic strip. So this is a really great volume here. It's 1932 to 1934. It's not a big one. It's a very small paperback, as you see. And then finally, I got a big Popeye hardback. And this one, that's the sea hag on the front there. Adventures on Plunder Island by Seagar. And that's the man himself there. E.C. Seagar with a pipe and a white hat like Popeye's. And this book is a bunch of Sundays of Popeye, of Thimble Theater. So you get to see all this adventure in color. All the panels same size, but yet each one composed so brilliantly. Wonderful work. It's a great challenge to do every panel same size and yet come up with a great composition and dialogue to fit each one. It's another thing to be mindful of when you're doing your comic strip or your animation. So here in black and white are some of the daily strips. I guess there's a few chapters of the dailies here. But check them out if you can. I got this at a comic book shop. Again, it's something that you could find at, maybe you can find it at Barnes & Noble, but I'm sure that Amazon has this set. I don't know how many volumes are in this set of Popeye books. It'll take you a while to get through it, but you'll enjoy it. So much fun. Looks like I paid $30 for this. So I'll put the all the particulars about when they were printed and published in the description, so you'll know what to order if you want to order them, or look for them at your local library. So until then, keep trying and keep having fun.